Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to Turning Climate Goals from Ambition into Action. I'm Megan Purdy and I'll be your host for today's webinar. In keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters, skies and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the oldest continuous cultures on Earth and our first engineers. We pay our respect to them and their cultures and to elders past and present. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that today's event is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner Arcadis. Arcadis is a global leader in delivering transformative projects for business, cities and industries with 36,000 professionals across more than 30 countries. By integrating world-class design, engineering, architecture and consultancy, the company provides end-to-end guidance from strategy and planning through to implementation, using both human expertise and digital innovation to address challenges such as climate resilience, energy diversification, and creating livable cities. Its work spans major global initiatives like sustainable legacies, such as the Paris Olympics, to modernising transit systems in cities such as Sydney and Toronto, and ensuring clean drinking water for communities across the US. Arcadis' solutions have strengthened resilience in over a third of the world's communities and supported hundreds of clients in advancing decarbonisation and net zero goals, helping shape a thriving and sustainable future. We thank Arcadis for their continued support. In today's session, we'll feature a panel discussion followed by a live audience Q&A, so I encourage you all to please send your questions through to our speakers via the chat box. I now have the pleasure to welcome our moderator for today, Ken Lunty, Technical Director, Sustainability, Arcadis. Ken is a sustainability leader with over 2 decades of experience driving climate-conscious design across infrastructure and mobility projects. As Technical Director for Sustainability at Arcadis, he champions integrated approaches to decarbonisation, helping organisations visualise and reduce the life cycle carbon footprint of their assets. Please join me in welcoming Ken Lunty.
Thanks, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us, and a big thank you to Engineers Australia for hosting today's session. Australia's climate ambition is moving from aspirational to operational, with the federal government's 2035 emissions reduction target calling for a 62 to 70% cut in greenhouse gas emissions, and the National Climate Risk Assessment warning that millions of Australians could be impacted by sea level rise by 2050. The direction of travel is now very clear. For organisations across engineering, infrastructure, energy and the built environment, the question is no longer if climate action is required, it's how fast, how credibly and how practically we can respond. The national movement towards climate mitigation and adaptation of mandatory reporting requirements. I had a good chat with one of our panelists in preparation for this webinar, and she mentioned that while sustainability reporting is about what the organisation has done in the past, the climate-related disclosure is much different. It's about investors, lenders, and other stakeholders' confidence that the organisation is prepared for a climate and carbon-constrained future. Requirements are structured around 4 key pillars under the new mandatory requirements under AAS SBS2. And these pillars are governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. Today's discussion will follow the same structure, but we'll explore beyond what to report and discuss drivers, shared experiences, and focus on what's next. The mandatory reporting is no longer something that's coming in a few years' time. It's here. He's already completing their reports if they operate on a calendar year. For many organizations, this first has felt confronting. Done the analysis, they see their carbon footprint for the first time, but more importantly, they're realizing that this is more than just, this is about identifying climate-related risks and opportunities, their exposure and how prepared or underprepared they are. That moment, as uncomfortable as it can be, is incredibly valuable because compliance is just the starting line. The real opportunity is what comes next. And here's the reality we're seeing across the market. Leading organizations have climate data, dashboards, inventories, spreadsheets, but the real challenge isn't collecting the data anymore, it's knowing what to do with it and being prepared for the future. So we'll start off with audience poll. Amazingly, we have over 800 people registered to attend this webinar. That in itself shows the importance and the urgency of this topic. Let's see if we can understand why you're here. So if you can just scan that QR code and join the Slido, it'd be interesting to see whether we have people who are completing their current report and they're curious to see what's next. They're in the process and they want to understand what's required. Or as an engineer, they just want to understand how they can support the requirements and preparing their organizations for a climate constrained and carbon constrained future. And maybe some of you are here just to get the CPD points. I don't know. But we've only had 2 people respond so far. It'd be great to see if we can get more people responding to this Slido. Interestingly, we've got a few engineers, mostly people wanting to understand what they can do to support. There's a few people who are in the process and also people who have already completed their first mandatory climate report. Great to hear no one's here just for the CPD points. Well, we'll keep doing that poll. But in the meantime, and we'll take a snapshot at the end, and in the meantime, we'll kind of continue with the webinar. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Today isn't about walking through the reporting line by line. We have some very experienced panelists here to talk to us about their experience in the reporting process. But really, we want to understand the drivers, the journey, and what's next. And we'll structure this webinar in the same way that the AASB S2 is structured, through the 4 pillars of governance, which is how organizations are responding at the leadership level, strategy in terms of how that reporting is reshaping the direction and decision making within your organization, risk management, so how climate risks and opportunities are being understood and prioritized, and then finally metrics and targets in terms of how to interpret results of your data and how to recalibrate your targets to drive progress within your organization. To help unpack that, I'm joined today by a panel of industry experts who have deep experience in sustainability and change management and are working through this process with their stakeholders, senior leaders, and boards. I've known these panelists for, in some cases, almost 2 decades, and I have utmost respect for them. First of all, we have Alexandra Monson. Alex Monson is Venture's Group Manager for Sustainability with more than 20 years experience in sustainability and environmental management across services and maintenance, transport, construction, and corporate sustainability roles. Alex is passionate about driving long-term outcomes from big projects to small behaviors. Alex's recent achievements include establishing Venture's sustainability strategy, targets, plans, and reporting, including delivering Venture's first AASB S2 sustainability report in February. So Alex has been through the process and can talk to her experience there. Next, we have Shauna Coffey. Shauna is the head of sustainability at Transgrid, leading the organization's work on decarbonisation and enterprise climate resilience through the transition to a cleaner energy system. She brings deep experience in sustainability strategy, disaster resilience collaboration, and infrastructure planning, with previous leadership roles across industry and advisory. Shauna is a recognised contributor to shaping how Australia's energy networks enable national climate ambitions. Finally, we have Daniel Cahill. Dan Cahill is the Group Sustainability Manager at BMD, recognised for his energetic leadership style. He brings a practical understanding of the sustainability challenges faced both corporately and at project level. His work reflects a passion for delivering long-term organizational value and fostering resilience in an evolving environmental and regulatory landscape. So welcome, Alex, Shauna, and Dan. It is interesting to note that your companies are all theoretically within each other's supply chain. So Transgrid as an asset owner, BMD as a construction contractor, and Venture in asset management, operations, and maintenance. So through my discussions with each of you over the last few weeks when we've been preparing for this webinar, I understand that your organizations have different drivers in terms of managing climate-related risks. Can we start the discussion going into the governance pillar by talking a little bit about the drivers around, I guess, reporting and disclosing around climate change risks? So I think we'll start first with you, Shauna, at Transgrid. What's driving, I guess, disclosure of climate risk and opportunities and management of climate-related risks and opportunities at Transgrid?
Thanks, Ken. And thanks to engineers for hosting us all today. We at Transgrid are a little bit of an anomaly, I guess, for this audience, in that we don't have the compliance-driven disclosure obligation for climate-related risk and opportunity management. So the drivers are quite different. And it's certainly not something new to the business to be thinking in this way. So our approach has been to build climate resilience across the organisation, with the disclosures and our ability to disclose to be an outcome of that process. And that's a really fortunate position to be able to come from, to take a bit more time to take it from understanding climate-related risks and opportunities, understanding the information needs of our supply chain, but actually then taking the action when necessary across the business to actually address those and build that climate resilience. We have a climate resilience and disclosure working group that forms sort of the part of the governance structure for managing these issues across the organisation. And it's very deliberately called climate resilience and disclosure, because the outcome is not just disclosure. The outcome is resilience, and that's what we are looking for from that process. And that is something that I would encourage everyone to have in place from a governance perspective for their work towards disclosure or building climate resilience. Is you will need that multifunctional, cross-organizational management group at a senior level within the business to actually understand and build the organizational response to climate resilience and ultimately disclosure. It's not something that is going to be able to sit within the sustainability team, or just the asset management team, or just the finance team, or indeed even, it has to have inputs and accountabilities for understanding and action spread across the business. And then that, I guess, the involvement of the broad cross-section of people in that group, a strong work program with accountabilities against different people that maintains that momentum. So even when we have, in the absence of a disclosure obligation, we are really focused on integrating with the business and making sure that people are seeing the value and the need for and the value in actually building that climate resilience within their particular space. And that's so important to maintain that momentum. We do then get the opportunity to continue to consider what it is we will disclose. We obviously are part of a supply chain. We have security holders and other investors who are really interested in this and want certain information from us. So we have to be able to prepare ourselves to be able to produce that information.
That's really interesting, Shauna. So you actually don't have to report, and you're not covered under the mandatory reporting, I guess, drivers. So you're at one end of the spectrum where you're almost doing it as business continuity and risk management in terms of being integrated around, continuing to operate in a climate changed environment into the future. so that you can still provide a service to the communities that obviously TransGrid provides that service to. On the other end of the scale, we've got Venture, publicly listed company, Group 1 entity that's already done their reporting. So obviously compliance is a main driver, but how did you eventuate to get your reporting done, I think earlier than it was even supposed to be done? And how did you kind of arrange and work with the senior leaders at Venture to get that reporting and disclosure done efficiently at Venture, Alex?
And hello to everyone on the call today. Yes, very happy to share that. We certainly do have that different driver of that mandatory requirement. And the reason that our report was out in February is because we're a calendar year, financial year. So January to December reporters are required to report in the earlier part of this year, rather than when most of the first Group 1 reporters will come out, will be probably that July, August reporting season. So yes, we had the joy of going earlier than most, but also I suppose the challenge of not having lots of others to look at the time, which there's benefits in that, I suppose, being able to create our own adventure in that side of things. But I would like to sort of take a step back and say that isn't the only driver, of course, to look at this. And Ventia, like many organisations, have been looking at climate risk and opportunities and measuring against targets for a number of years, and seeing the driver back then, and it remains, it's not just that reporting regulatory driver. It's really then to unlock what's the strategic opportunity, what's the link to strategy, that sort of growth and opportunity identification, as well as the management of risk. You can't manage risk unless you can understand it. And I will talk a little bit about risk management today around I suppose it's the physical risk as well as the transition risks through what the climate future may look like under different scenarios into the future. So there's certainly core drivers to understand, unpack those, link into strategy to hopefully realise some of that sort of growth and opportunity. And I think what the reporting standards provide, though, while yes, it's a challenge and a new sort of reporting burden, we could say, really integrating into different parts of the business that Shauna alluded to as well, particularly really understanding financial risk. And I think that's a key change with this standard. It's not the same thing that we've done before. Reporting sustainability and about climate is not about just indicating ambition and direction. It is about providing clear information on the impact and potential impact of climate transition and physical risks on the financial performance of an organisation. So that's certainly an outcome, but it is a driver as well in terms of understanding what does that mean for a sustainable business moving forward.
Thanks, Alex. And now we have Dan. Dan, I know BMD, is still a family-run business, as I understand, and very fast-growing as a business, as a diversified business. I know you do more than construction contracting. What's your journey been? I understand you're going to have to report as a Group 2 entity, and your reporting's coming up next year, I suppose. What's your journey been in terms of, I guess, the drivers around this, and seeing how your leadership and the governance and the board, the boardroom changing in terms of that family-run mindset that still has to report mandatory, but probably isn't used to this kind of public disclosure mechanism. So it'd be interesting to hear your journey with BMD around this.
Yeah, many thanks, Ken, for the introduction earlier. Yeah, BMD, we're in a interesting position of we're actually we do qualify for a Group 1 company, so we're in this position of being a privately held Group 1 company with a very complex supply chain. So we are required to publish a climate-related financial disclosure at the end of this financial year. But interestingly, we're also part of the supply chain ourselves. So even linked to some of the other speakers here, this on this call, on this webinar. So we also need to respond to their drivers as well. We are definitely seeing a greater scrutiny in climate risk governance during procurement. There's a lot more checks and balances and scrutiny in this space, and we're being expected more and more to demonstrate a credible decarbonisation pathway. So these are all definitely parts of our value proposition to our clients and part of work winning. I think the upside of mandatory climate reporting for us is that it's definitely moved climate risk into core business risk. Similar to what Alex was saying with respect to other financial risks in the business. So this has been a great tool to assess our resilience, both in terms of BMD's strategy and business model. So really looking at where our exposure is and making sure that we're in a good place for the future.
Thanks, Dan. I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit around what's happening at the board and executive level within your organizations. This is, I think, that mentality that sustainability reporting is that, I think, I mentioned earlier, is that looking back at all the nice stuff that you've done in the environmental and social area is kind of transitioned to, well, how are we going to prepare the organization to be financially viable in a future where there's more extreme weather events, there's technology changes that are happening quicker than we know. I mean, we can look at things like AI and electrification, and I guess positioning organizations to be able to manage the risks, but also harness the opportunities around climate change and, I guess, a carbon constrained economy. It'd be interesting to hear from, I guess, anyone who wants to answer this question in terms of how this is being approached by boards and executives now. I know, for example, for us in Arcadis, we see many opportunities to develop climate resilient infrastructure through our design and engineering solutions, and we're really trying to find out ways that we can be better than our competitors. So there's a lot of thinking around opportunity, but also the risk of designing something that may not be fit for the 50-year design life or 100-year design life. But it'd be interesting to hear, I guess, from your lens, what how are boards treating this and how are executives treating this outside of the sustainability world, right? Because this reporting is really more than sustainability. It's about financial viability and financial sustainability for your organization. So throw that out there too. Maybe we'll start with you, Alex, because you've been through your first report.
Sure. Happy to take this one first. And I think that was really, for me, with the number one learning through the process of looking at the report. So while certainly there's been reporting and visibility through to the board for a long time now in terms of sustainability, what the focus with the new standards really bring that into focus in terms of who has accountability to sign off and what are the processes behind that. There is requirements around assurance, which provide a whole other level of sort of scrutiny as well. So it's a really good catalyst to advance the conversation at that senior level from a climate perspective. So when we embarked on the journey, so over a year ago, really looked at what are the governance processes that we already had in place and where they might need to be enhanced or adjusted with the driver of reporting, but really to look at how do we use some of those governance structures to really embed, I suppose, visibility, but also consideration of climate into key decision points and processes throughout the organisation. So again, similar to was the structure that Shauna spoke to around working groups and bringing people together. We did form a management level climate working group, so senior leaders across different functions across the business. But key that it was led by finance and sustainability in our organisation, because as you said, Ken, this isn't just a sustainability team endeavour. It now really is co-owned and co-led with finance.
I think we might have lost Alex there. So while we're waiting for, oh, here we go. Sorry, you're back, Alex. We just froze for a bit.
I'm back. Oh, you missed all the good nuggets that I shared then while I was frozen.
We got to where you said you're like it is owned by finance. I think we missed probably about five seconds of it. And probably frozen again there. I might move on to maybe Sean or Dan if you've got any thoughts or any additional information you can add to Alex's comment around how this is really more than sustainability and it is owned by finance. I'm finding the same in our organization. We're increasingly talking to the finance manager and the head of legal around how we're managing these processes as well. But Sean or Dan, do you have anything you want to add to Alex's comments?
I think perhaps just to echo some of what Alex has already spoken to, there's a real big shift in the introduction of the mandatory reporting that sort of converted, I suppose, board oversight more of an interest to ownership. And similar to what Alex has discussed, that really brought in, with that ownership, it really brought in a big collaboration within the business. So the finance team, there's sustainability team, the strategy team, risk and audit team all played a huge part in drafting what will be our first disclosure. There's an old saying, I know it's well said, but with good governance, you can do anything. But it needs to align with your business. So we've been really cognizant that our business may operate slightly different to some others. So we've been really making sure that we are true to that and address these the mandatory reporting in a way that works for our business and ultimately addresses the needs of the people reading that report. So that's probably a bit of it from our side of it.
Thanks, Dan. I like that comment around with good governance, you can do anything. I think that's a good real kind of wrap up around the governance pillar. And I really do agree with you. Strong governance is what turns climate related considerations from a reporting exercise into a decision making tool. If we don't have good governance, when we're just going to be reporting risks as a compliance exercise. And I think a lot of us as engineers and scientists have gone through risk workshops to death. And what you really need is strong governance to turn those risk management exercises into action. So with that, I think we'll move on to the strategy pillar. So strategy is really where we're starting to see some challenges, right? So we can set the right governance, we can have a strong climate change strategy, but how do we integrate that with business strategy, right? So many organizations have set climate strategy, including carbon targets and how they're going to manage climate resilience or climate risks. Many years ago, under very different assumptions, I remember seeing many organizations having a net zero target by 2030 that was set 10, 15 years ago, and now we're 4 years away from 2030, and we're starting to see with mandatory reporting and disclosure that there's quite a bit of a gap between ambition and reality. So I really want to explore how, I guess, strategies have changed based on better data, better information, and stronger governance around organizations. So I know, Alex, again, I'm picking on you. You've just finished your first disclosure. Did you uncover any surprises that required a change in thinking or a change in strategy for Venture from before you did your disclosure?
I think perhaps rather than surprises, it was I suppose really understanding that while there's still a place for ambition and goals in terms of setting direction for an organization and informing strategy, when we come to disclosures, we do need to set that credible pathway. We need to define how we're going to get there, to be very clear to the users of a report that there is a plan in place, that we understand what that looks like is there funding required, those kind of things. But a key learning really for us was that this is around climate risk and opportunities. It's around resilience. And it's about planning for resilience in the business strategy and what's that link. So it wasn't just that strategy and plans need to be about emissions reduction. That may well be an important part of it, depending on the organization, but actually what in the business strategy helps support resilience in different climate conditions that may occur in the future, where are parts of the business or assets that you own or areas that you operate in where they might be more vulnerable, and what does that look like? And so what does your strategy respond and recognize those? I think that was probably our key learning. But then also perhaps in terms of some tangible parts of our goals, if I can talk to that, we've set science-based targets a few years ago, and while they still stand, we had made some assumptions about the pathway that we would get there, and as we've got in and done the work, found that some of those goals, while the target still stands, the way to get there might be different. So an example of that is that we thought, well, across our fleet of almost 4,000 vehicles, they maybe all be hybrid and electric by 2030. As we've looked into that, thought there may be limitations and technology availability that might not make that feasible. So what are the other pathways and things we can do across our direct emissions footprint that we can pull those levers and make other changes to still have the target and reach that and model and know how we can do that, but being able to move away from being fixed to, well, this is the only way that we get there, if that makes sense. So the target may not change, but your pathway may, and it's understanding that and being very clear on where there are limitations, dependencies, and having the ability to flex and change as you mature.
I think that's a really interesting comment, and I think the key is around transparency and really being real about what you've committed to and how you're going to get there and what that may cost against the value that you're going to receive from that. So I guess, Dan, I wanted to kind of explore the idea of targets and recalibrating those targets or rethinking the pathway to those targets. I think sometimes that can be quite unsettling, especially if you need to talk to an executive or board level. How would you, I guess, experience going to a board and resetting a target or a commitment or a pathway to a particular target without losing credibility, and making sure that you're still kind of in line with the business strategy overall?
Yeah, I think not just equally applies to setting targets, not just resetting or recalibrating targets, but the best way to do it is without losing credibility, I believe, is transparency. When you set a strategy or you're setting targets, you need to be really clear around the boundaries of your strategy or targets, whatever the case may be. That includes all the baseline that you've used to inform that decision, dependencies, and your pathway. How are you going to get there? When it relates to targets itself, this is some of the expectations, and today's not on greenwashing by any means, but some of that transparency is what's required by the ACCC as well in making an environmental claim, and that equally applies to setting a strategy or a target as well, or resetting them. And a lot of organisations, if they are resetting their targets, may be very much because they need to demonstrate more transparency on the matter. The other thing that I think is really important, and something that we've done as well, is robust validity testing. Test your targets, test all your strategy against scenarios in the real world. Knowing that I think if you know that your pathway is real and you've stress tested that and you know the results, you can speak more easily to it in your board discussions or more generally in the public, with a lot more conviction. So I think for me, that would be the key topics I think which have served us well in setting those targets with a high degree of credibility.
Thanks, Dan. Shauna, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a very long time, and at one point, many years ago, you were my manager for a period of time. I know you've had lots of experience across different sectors, and in sustainability, for your entire career, which is quite rare, I guess. So I know you've had experience in you know property trusts, in insurance, and now in energy, and you've been delivering, I guess, sustainability reports and setting targets and strategies for the better part of 20 years. Um, I guess the question I'd like to ask you is, across all the different sectors and across the evolution of sustainability reporting and now into mandatory disclosure, um, how have you seen, I guess, targets being set change and integration within strategy change? And how have you seen, I guess, uh, the setting of those targets and linking of those targets to costs and practical barriers change, I guess, over the period of time you've been working in there, if that makes sense.
That's
Has
a
it
big
changed from that?
question. Yeah, has it changed? So yeah, I have been doing sustainability for a long time, and I've lived through the cycles of sustainability over that time, from pre 2000 GFC, heady days, and post GFC type of operationalization focus, and pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID, changes of government, changes of policy, all of those different changes. And you are constantly scanning the horizon for that risk opportunity in that changing political landscape, regulatory landscape, physical landscape, and then looking to see how that actually poses either a risk or an opportunity to the corporate strategy. Because that's really where what my job is to interpret and advise that what those things are, and how there may be sort of a space for the corporate strategy to move into or move away from as a result of those changing environments. So over the time, yes, targets have focused on, let's say, mitigation, emissions reduction. That was the real focus. It started with resource efficiency, I guess, and then it had to be cost driven. There was a period of time where we couldn't even mention the word climate change because we would be launched into a philosophical discussion of, is I don't believe in climate change. So it was like, reduce emissions, reduce cost, win-win. And that's a really easy conversation to have in something like property, where electricity use at the time was well metered. We had measurement frameworks in place for the sector, so we could compare performance across buildings within portfolios within different organizations and locations and the like. So it's very easy to focus on, that resource consumption type of a metric. TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the precursor to the international standards around financial disclosures, and ultimately the Australian standards on financial disclosures, was a game changer to sort of start to think of the mitigation and adaptation landscape. Working with insurance, I think it was a great time to be within the insurance sector, because if anyone's looking ahead and looking to understand what is likely to happen from a physical climate change perspective, and the direct impact on insured costs, premiums, and so on, it's the insurance industry, and there's sort of a huge depth of expertise in that space that's their job to really focus on that. So that became an area where you could find obvious targets and programs of work to be looking at understanding and then mitigating those impacts on the corporate strategy and the corporate costs, and ultimately through to share security price and shareholders. Within different something like the energy sector is diverse. Transmission is at a part of that, but then setting a target around, we do have obviously our net zero reduction targets, but when you look at where the drivers are for our emissions, it's fundamentally transmission system losses and our scope 3 procured goods and services. We know we have a legacy component of SF6 within our scope 1, but it is at this point in time very much dwarfed by the transmission system loss component. But as we know, you decarbonise the grid, you drive down the emissions component of those system losses, and they become a much smaller part of your portfolio. I think that's where, from a transgrid perspective, we work very closely with the strategy team that are integrating physical climate scenarios into broad-based scenario planning for the organisation, and that is something the business is really comfortable doing. When we take an integrated system plan, it has different futures that need to be considered, but we know the transmission network will look very different to today's network. We're talking, a surge in renewables from sort of 40 to 50% to 90%. Demand will be transformed. People move to electrification, data centers surge, household batteries and solar panels and the like. That supply and demand load is really going to change. We're going to have a bigger network. We're looking at 2,000 kilometres of new backbone of transmission lines and up to 30 new substations. So, needing to respond to that, regional dispersed renewable generation as it replaces that centralised generation means a completely different and much more advanced operating technology is required. So what I found here is it's not that these sort of changes aren't already firmly within the mindset of executive and board. It's just that they don't necessarily think of them as climate related. And I still at times find myself needing to avoid those conversations around climate change. But one thing that everyone is really happy to sort of go, yeah, I'll accept that, is that coal-fired generation is reached its end of life, and that generation needs to be replaced, and renewable generation is the lowest cost generation available. So the business strategy has to be to make that network available to be able to bring that renewable generation into the grid and enable those emissions reductions for all of society, and that is the role. So there is a massive opportunity within climate change, even if it isn't necessarily thought of in that terms for the business.
I think that's really interesting insight, and I think all of us in our careers have probably seen, and I think it's probably the paradox of a sustainability professional, is that every day seems like you're banging your head against a wall, but when you look back 20 years, things have changed quite significantly, yet we still do sometimes have the same conversations around climate change. So I think from what I'm hearing is the gap between strategy, business strategy, and climate change related strategy is getting smaller, and there's a lot of interface between the two now. In that, there's evidence that climate change does affect business continuity and does affect profitability and service provision. Recalibrating a target isn't necessarily a failure; it's a sign of maturity, and being transparent is very, very important in terms of disclosing not only your targets, but your pathways towards those targets to make sure that they're credible. With that, I think we'll move into the third pillar of risk management, just to try and stick to time and have time for questions. So in terms of risk management, the AASB S2 I guess standard defines risk management is about understanding physical risks of climate change, the transition risks of how an organization will be able to manage technology changes, legislative changes, and so on, but also opportunities around climate change into the future. I know, Sean, I'll go back to you again because we did have a lot of discussion around this in the lead up to the webinar. And we know that when we talk about disclosure and climate change related risks, the mindset kind of automatically goes into carbon and carbon footprints and mitigating carbon and all that. But in Transgrid, like you've just identified, you're part of the energy transition and part of decarbonizing the grid. So some of those carbon issues are going to be managed just through the way your business is operating in terms of connecting renewable energy zones and so on. And often physical risks kind of get a little bit forgotten in this mandatory disclosure. But for Transgrid, obviously, physical risks are a major issue. So could you talk through how Transgrid has gone through identifying and managing climate-related physical risks to your assets?
Sure. And the starting point is really that network reliability is not non-discretionary. We are required to maintain that standard, and that focus on reliability underpins renewable investment, electrification, industrial growth. And it's the provision of the electricity is central to all of those things, and it is an ongoing balance of cost, risk, and performance. So, as we've gone through the process of climate-related risks and opportunities, again, has been a multi-discipline to activity. And we spent a lot of time talking about the difference between enterprise level risk and asset level risk, and as well as enterprise level opportunity and asset or activity level opportunity, because we obviously have a very large asset. We also have a lot of construction activity as we build out those additional transmission line backbone. So it was a matter of sort of thinking of it in all of those different blocks. And it's not like it was the first time we were thinking about this. So what we were really able to do was almost sort of reach into the asset management system, which is the core governance foundation for that network, that sets out how we plan and build and operate and maintain that network asset across its full life cycle. And the work that team has accountability for and is doing to sort of think of that what does that look like under various climate scenarios heading into the future. So the business has a network asset strategy, and that's the blueprint for advancing the asset management system. And it provides that top level guidance for all asset classes and strategies. In the latest network asset strategy, resilience is a central pillar of that strategy, and that's both physical climate related risks as well as cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So that sort of physical and digital resilience is a big focus of that. So there's very clearly prescribed processes for identifying risk. It's like that cost, risk, and performance balance, and there is this constant focus on identifying, managing, and mitigating material asset risks. But working in, we are a financially regulated asset. We serve the consumer. And so the objective isn't always that sort of best resilience outcome. It has to sort of be the most prudent and efficient to manage risk within acceptable limits. So it is a slightly it's a different way of thinking about it, and it's certainly influenced by being that financially regulated entity that is has to justify all investment in terms of the national energy objectives and it being a prudent and efficient investment for the consumer. So, there's been a lot of work done from that asset management perspective to really dive into the physical risk exposure of the network asset itself. And that forms a big part of those risks and opportunities. But then the other parts of that I mentioned at the beginning is also identifying things like what is the risk exposure that we have to our construction workforce, and then the transitional risk perspective as well from an enterprise level that exists across the organisation. That includes things like a changing regulatory environment and how do we what do we expect that to look like and how do we make sure that we're able to respond to changing financial and other regulatory aspects. How do we manage workforce issues and supply chain issues as well? So that was something with this conversation and the panelists that are here today. I think there's a real opportunity to sort of look through your supply chain and use that as some calibration for how you've assessed risk in your own business. Because if we have identified a risk within our supply chain, but then that supplier discloses that they manage that risk in a certain way, we can then come back and recalibrate our risk assessment for that particular matter.
Thanks, Shauna. I think that's a really good segue into exploring your supply chain through Alex and Dan. Obviously, you probably have very different risk profiles, one as an asset operator and maintainer in Venture, but also a construction contractor in BMD. Can we talk through, I guess, Dan, in terms of risk management and looking at both, I guess, exposure to carbon transition risks? I mean, there's a big one now. Obviously, the price of diesel has gone through the roof, and companies are quite good at addressing shocks like that and recalibrating their strategy when they have a shock or managing that risk. But arguably, in 10 to 15 years, that could be the normal price of diesel, and you've had to deal with it today. Can you talk through physical and transitional risk management at BMD, and then I think would like to hear from Ventia as well, where your contracts are operating and owning assets for 10 years, where you probably have to look at those risks as well. So we'll start with Dan, and then Alex, if you want to join in the discussion around that risk management.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Look, just very quickly, climate risk and even opportunity is directly affecting project delivery and our margins. So, to the degree there of the risk or opportunity is the point of discussion. If climate risk isn't understood early, there's a real chance it will show up later in a way that you don't want it to, either in cost or delay. So, or even if you're, in the likes of some of the speakers here today, if we can't demonstrate governance around climate risk, we may lose the opportunity in the first instance. We do a lot of work in scenario analysis and stress testing our business, and that's been really, really good to find where more institutionally where our exposure is. And And for me, the exciting part of doing all that, and sort of based on what the work Sean has already spoken to, we've gone down that road ourselves. But after it's all said and done, is when is where the rubber hits the road, and that's where you're now armed with that information. What are you going to do about it? How do you integrate that into your business? How do you manage the risks and opportunities? How do you make that amicable to your business? And again, that's what investors, readers, the insurance companies, that's what they want to know. And so that's where it's really exciting, and that's where that information is very, very helpful.
And Alex, you have to manage risks probably far into the future, given your contracts last years in terms of operating and inheriting risks from asset owners and managing those risks. So what's your take on risk management for both physical and transitional risks?
I think there's a few sort of lenses or layers to look at it across, and the first is, I suppose, think of risk like any risk. You look at what, I suppose, the prioritization around materiality, which is a term we use a lot now around climate disclosures, granted. But when you're really assessing on a number of different things, well, how does one risk or opportunity sort of weigh up against another? How integral is it to your strategy, and linked to what Dan was sort of saying then in terms of your ability to win work and do things. Relating it, I suppose, having a consistency of scoring and approach across how you manage other risks, whether it's safety, financial risks, and making sure you're using the same processes across the business so that they really are truly embedded. It's not just something that one team manages and looks over here. But then for those that are prioritized and are your most material sort of focus areas, making sure there's a link, that prioritization to action and ownership. So if it's something that is across a broad number of teams, then how do we prioritize and make sure that the right processes are embedded, but there's clear owners to drive some of those things forward as well?
Great. We'll move on to the final pillar, which is metrics and targets. And interestingly, I think everyone, especially from an engineering background or a science background, we love numbers and metrics and targets. And this pillar probably gets the most airtime, but we've kind of saved it for last because you could have the best data in the world for your organization, but if you don't have the right governance structures in place, or you don't have the right systems and processes around risk management, then that data doesn't really kind of integrate into organizational change. So this pillar focuses on collecting data, understanding your financial exposure to climate change, and developing targets and pathways for decarbonisation and climate resilience. So I'll send this question out to, I guess, to all of you. How do you manage your data, and how do you kind of collect, I guess, both your carbon-related and non-carbon-related data, and I guess consolidate that to build targets? What's been your journey to date? We'll start with Alex.
I think there's a difference as well where we're looking at our data and our footprint. If we're talking about emissions, that's a key metric that organisations are potentially more familiar with looking at in the climate space compared to other metrics. We have been looking at our direct sort of footprint, so our scope 1 and 2 for a number of years, and typically that's where there's more or clearer or better data available. We're used to looking at that. There's a little bit more maturity with that, or there's always scope to improve processes, how it's collected, leveraging technology, data scraping tools, different things like that to get things quicker and better visibility. The interesting one, of course, is the broader indirect footprint across scope 3. So particularly for Ventia, across our value chain, or across our whole footprint, our scope 3 emissions is about 94% of our overall footprint. And while we're not focusing solely on reporting today, I would just point out that of the first round of reports, sustainability reports, climate disclosures that have come out, only around 30%, last time I looked, actually disclosed Scope 3 in those reports. I think there's a particular reason for that. One, that it's not mandatory to do it in the first year. Ventia, we opted to include Scope 3 in our report for a number of reasons, mainly because it's so material to our footprint. We thought it's difficult to talk about our strategy and climate-related risks and opportunities without talking about the full impact and the full footprint. So we thought it's important to do that, but also not shying away from the fact that, yes, there's more limitations in that data than Scope 1 and 2. We know there are dependencies and more uncertainties with the data generally. And certainly when we're talking about goals into the future, that broadens that uncertainty again. So being very clear on that in our reporting, but realizing that we can then really use that as a catalyst internally to say, well, how do we get better visibility across the data, but not shying away from the fact that it's important to get started anyway, because if we waited until Scope 3 data was perfect, well, we probably miss when it is going to be mandatory in the report. So we need to be clear about what we're capturing, where that's from, how we're dealing with it, efforts that we're undertaking to improve it over time, but more importantly, how do we use the information that we do have to take some action and focus where we can improve. And for us, where we work with a lot of suppliers, and most of our Scope 3 footprint is through our purchase goods and services, so the supply chain that we work with. So supply chain engagement is a really important lever for us. Just as I assume we are important to Shauna and her business as a supplier into them. So I'm sure supplier engagement is important for Shauna too.
Shauna, do you have any comments on Scope 3? Yeah.
So yes, we have been measuring our and disclosing our Scope 3 emissions. I think 2021 was a baseline. And when we were setting our net zero targets, we have an absolute target for Scope 1 and 2. Because of the scale of size of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, we weren't, and under the Science-Based Target Initiative methodology, we weren't required to set a Scope 3 target, but we did. And this, I can see some of the questions that are coming through, and it does sort of talk about that, the setting aspirational versus bottom-up type targets. I think for us, that was a really useful discussion to be saying, look, carbon targets are different to maybe the kind of targets that execs are usually comfortable setting. This is not, you didn't start this from the, let's add up all of the incremental changes and that are possible, and then that's where we'll set the target. It was, this is what has to happen. This is the amount of, this is the carbon budget, and this is the contribution, and this is what you've got to operate in to actually achieve the Paris commitment. So it was and that kind of discussion happened at executive. And I'm not saying it was not a unanimous type of decision. It was, this is the type of target that we need to set as pretty much table stakes for the stakeholder conversations that we wanted to have, the investor conversations that we wanted to have. I digress, as I tend to do. Scope 3, though, we did set an intensity target because we knew that we had a construction pipeline, a massive construction pipeline ahead of us, and we wanted to be able to chase down emissions reductions within that, category 1 and 2, purchase goods and services and capital goods, whilst still delivering the corporate strategy around transmission infrastructure build out. So it's a space that we focus on a lot. We work with our delivery partners and construction service providers, and I've really got to give credit to our procurement team for the work that they're doing in building those relationships and starting those conversations with our suppliers, so that we can actually then identify emissions reductions opportunities and build them into project design. Because if it doesn't happen in the design and procurement phase, it's not going to happen in the post-contracting. It has to be built in early into the process. It has to sort of be considered in terms of design standards, and then procurability of and deliverability of the emissions reductions initiative needs to be supported by the regulator in terms of funding, and then it actually needs to be contracted and delivered. So we look a lot to our suppliers to bring those innovations to us so that they can be brought in at the right stage in project planning. Because we've spoken at length about many occasions, if this is left too far down the process of project initiation, you just can't get the change.
Thanks, Shauna. I think just moving on to Dan, I know as a contractor and having worked with you on some projects, there are sometimes very strong contractual requirements to measure and disclose this data to your client, and sometimes less stringent requirements. How does BMD go around collecting this data across what could be dozens, if not hundreds, of projects all around Australia, and manage the data? Not just scope 1, of which you have quite a bit of exposure to through fuel use, but also scope 3, where you've got a lot of materials and goods and services as well that you manage. So talk us through a little bit about how you manage BMD's data around both carbon and other non-carbon metrics.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. We have a lot of project sites, a lot of facilities, and a lot of sometimes even differing client expectations around the scope 1, 2, and 3 data collection. We have developed a lot of in-house capability with respect to measuring and reporting on our scope 1 and 2 in particular. Which we lean on very heavily, especially for our own internal purposes for the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Act requirements and other things. So we do roll that up into client reporting where needed, but obviously that also helps us internally. Scope 3 brings along a whole new challenge. A lot of those systems were set up for a previous environment with NGA's reporting. So we've really had to look at ways that we can remain consistent across our business, starting with what a lot of companies are also considering a financial-led approach to scope 3 emission reporting, with the provision that we really want to build on that to more product-related and real data going into that calculation. So for us, consistency, repeatability, assurance are really big drivers in that scope 3 space. As well as how do we support, how we can use that to support our clients as well.
Thanks, Dan. So we've explored the 4 pillars of the ASB S2 standard, and it's very clear that we need to balance sustainability with the financial performance and financial productivity and sustainability of a business. I'd like to kind of wrap up before we go to questions, just wrap up with a statement probably from each of you around, I guess, what is the biggest call of action within your organization? You're in the process of doing your reporting, or you've completed your reporting, or you're undertaking your risk management within your organization. What do you see as the biggest action that we need to do going forward to maintain business continuity in your organizations within a climate constrained and carbon constrained environment in the future? So I'll start with you, Alex.
Oh, thank you. For us, I think it's around maintaining and increasing the momentum. So taking on the learnings through the process from the last year, and then how do we take that into really enhancing the processes in the organizations to build the resilience and that link to strategy. That's sort of the key thing. But then I suppose taking that to perhaps some more project level data focus as well. Thinking about what are the initiatives that link then and support into those broader kind of strategy, value creation type opportunities, and say what are the initiatives that then align to those more material opportunities and management of risk, that then can help realise some of those opportunities through managing things within our control, where there's, I suppose, a low risk, sort of easy win opportunities to take in the first instance to sort of continue to build that momentum on the ground as well.
Thanks, Alex. Shauna?
I think I've seen the most engagement and change when you challenge existing assumptions around likelihood and consequence of certain events. I think when we've brought climate into conversations when reviewing our existing risk register and had those what if conversations, it's forced people to go, maybe that won't play out the way I think I've previously thought it would happen. And I think that happens particularly when you start to talk about compounding events, fires followed by floods. And will I be able to mount the recovery activity that I thought I could at that point in time if there's these other compounding issues at play at the same time, and having those conversations and with risk owners is when you get people sort of having an aha moment and really thinking about that climate risk level and the financial consequences of that. Perhaps the consequence is much more than you thought it was, simply because there's an exacerbating effect of climate.
Thanks, Shauna. And Dan, your thoughts?
No, that's echoing what's already said. Yes, mandatory or climate reporting is mandatory, but use it as a catalyst for better governance, better decisions in your business. Don't just treat it as a compliance exercise. There is an opportunity there to use it as a tool in your business strategy, and heavily inform the risk of your business in an amicable way.
Thanks, Dan. I think that's a good place to wrap up and move on to questions. So what I'm hearing is there's no real silver bullet. It's a continual improvement exercise. Mandatory climate reporting isn't about compliance. It gives organizations the opportunity to show their progress and approach to managing climate-related business risks. It allows them to see where their ambition and their reality is in terms of a gap, where their risks are concentrated and where their exposure is, and where actions will matter. We've explored the 4 pillars. Governance is there to set accountability. Strategy sets the direction. Risk management sets the priorities, and metrics and targets track progress. So the organizations that will lead this decade aren't the ones with the most polished reports. They're the ones that use reporting as a catalyst for change, as you've said, Dan, to inform future business strategy and give confidence to investors, lenders, and stakeholders that they are prepared for the future. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for joining today. We'll now start addressing some of the questions that come through the chat.
Thanks for that, Ken. Well, as Ken so rightly said, it's time for our audience to get involved in the discussion today. So please submit your questions in the chat box, and don't forget to let me know who your question is directed to. A big thank you to everyone who submitted questions while registering for today's webinar. What I might do is I'll kick off with some of those. And the first question has come through from Justin from Victoria, and I might direct this one to you, Dan. Now, Justin's question is, when is the ideal time for a business such as Jado to determine their carbon footprint, including scope for the business, in readiness for mandatory scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions reporting?
I would say start now or start soon. If you're not required to disclose, or if you don't, if there's not a need for, you don't see a visible need for that data, there soon will be. The outside of mandatory disclosures, a lot of organisations are tackling this right now, and as such, will be chasing their supply chain for this data. So the sooner you act on it, it may give you a competitive advantage or an ability to address those tender requirements. I will say that in starting some of that too, you might, I think if you in starting that, I'd probably always advise setting up a bit of a roadmap, which you can discuss internally with your business. And Scope 2, if you're not already, is such an easy place to start. Start recording all the data you need around Scope 2, all your energy consumed, energy generated, that sort of thing. And then move into Scope 1 and the stuff that you can control, and keep building on that. Set yourself accountable to build on that. There is, there's property developers out there right now that are dealing with the climate disclosures, and there's a lot of smaller organisations that may very soon be asking for this. So I'd suggest making a start as soon as you can.
Thanks for that, Dan. Well, I'll jump into some of the live questions that we've got. Shauna, I'll direct this one through to yourself. And the question is, when sustainability issues are framed as cost, risk, or system planning challenges rather than climate, does that change how serious boards or executives consider it?
Yes. Yes, it does. It's for better or for worse, and I'm not saying this is in this organisation in particular, but they are words or language that board and executive are far more familiar with than climate. So, and I think that's really the reason behind the climate-related financial disclosures is translating what has previously been considered something that a little bit altruistic. Why would I be trying to change climate? Change climate. Why should I reduce emissions? Because how does that impact climate change for the world? Versus how does climate change actually impact the business? And what are those core metrics that are important to me as a business decision maker actually going to be impacted? So, yeah, it definitely framing it in those terms makes, it's something that those decision makers are far more familiar conversing in, and allows that real so what conversations to be had.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I've got a question which has come in from Priya from Victoria. And Alex, I might ask this one to yourself. And Priya's question was, how do you decide which climate initiatives deliver the most impact for the least cost? And which ones are worth pursuing even when they're expensive or uncertain?
That's a great question. So I think it's your decision system, make sure it balances what you're looking for from a climate outcome. So if that's emissions reduction or abatement, balancing that with the strategic risk and also organizational credibility. So probably across a few different layers. I mentioned before, sort of targeting the no regret, low cost wins is kind of an easy one, because then you don't have the high costs. So those typically would sit within your control, reduce emissions, but cost as well. Recognizing that a lot of initiatives, they're not in conflict, the costs. So particularly from an energy efficiency point of view, they'll normally complement each other. There are initiatives that can scale quickly. You'll have data that's robust enough to defend as well. But then again, if an initiative doesn't have a clear climate benefit and a clear owner, then the ability to challenge that and say, well, actually, is it the initiative that we should be targeting there? Screen your initiatives through a strategic lens. So perhaps it's not just about cost now, maybe on that project now, but what are we looking to do into the future? And some of that scenario testing that Dan was referring to as well, that can give you a really good bucket to think about. Will it protect future performance or revenue, the opportunity to win work? Does it de-risk future regulation perhaps? Does it unlock future opportunities down the track? Decide as well with different opportunities you're looking at where uncertainty is acceptable and where it isn't. So there might be higher tolerance for things if it's a pilot, giving things a go, that it's there's appetite internally around the culture that might create to give that a go. You might have a higher acceptance for more uncertainty there, and particularly if it's low cost again.
Awesome. Thank you. Dan, I have the next question I'll direct to yourself. And this question is, from your experience, what are the concrete signs that governance is actually influencing sustainability execution rather than just shaping disclosure or commitments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose for us and our panelists and most organisations in that matter, sustainability as a term or sustainability execution is, it's over the last few years, be it off the back of ACCC and greenwashing or the introduction of mandatory disclosure standards, it's very much turned from a marketing exercise to a real topic that organizations have to deal with. So when we talk about sustainability, at least in our business, and I know the panelists are the same, is we have established several years ago a governance structure around that that includes more than just the sustainability team. In fact, more often than not, it's not the sustainability team that are driving these or executing some of these initiatives that we want to do. And it's through that in that governance that we've established that, that we that all the checks and balances are done, and that the ownership and the accountability is given to the people appropriate or the teams appropriate to execute that. When it comes to, say, mandatory disclosure standards, and we've spoken to it today, that isn't being run out of the sustainability team. The governance of our business has decided, how to best operate that within our business structure itself. So, I think that's for us. Our governance is really important to us, and how we maintain that, how we hold ourselves accountable. And to that point, yeah, we, that's where the execution comes from. It's not from the sustainability team. It's from that established governance that has strong board oversight.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Dan. The next question, Ken, it's all about performance metrics. So this one is, how much credibility can be attached to Scope 1 GHG fugitive emissions, if I've said that right, calculated through desktop studies versus data collected through in-field direct measurement methods? If I can get my words out.
I think this question probably applies to more than just Scope 1 greenhouse gas fugitive emissions. And it'd be interesting to hear from the other panelists who've gone out to try and measure these emissions. But I think with anything, that there are guidelines around how to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions. But I think when you're measuring performance and you're collecting data, transparency is key, and outlining assumptions and where assumptions have been undertaken is really probably more important than getting the number precise. You don't want to be investing unrealistic time or money into trying to get a number that's precise if it's not necessarily material to your organization, or if that emission can be calculated from a desktop study based on, for example, how much of that fugitive emission you're purchasing, if it's a refrigerant, for example, rather than going out and trying to measure it directly. If we think about scope 3, which is your goods and services, essentially the starting point for scope 3 is measuring through, I guess, as a metric of how much money you're spending on those goods and services while you're setting up the right processes to collect data from your suppliers or understanding where that exposure is. But keen to hear if any of the panelists have any other thoughts around data collection and the processes around some of this data collection, because it can be quite challenging to get precise data.
Completely agree, Ken. Just briefly to say that it's having perfection is not what we're looking for here necessarily. It's about showing that improvement and clarity of where there are assumptions made in the data.
Thanks, Alex. I think we're running out of time. I've got one more question that I think we can squeeze in. So, Shauna, I might ask this question or direct it to yourself. And it is, apart from good governance, what differentiates organisations that use climate reporting as a strategic tool from those that treat it as a compliance?
Yeah. To me, the thing that would differentiate is that one is likely to have a nice report that meets compliance obligations. The other is actually likely to have a corporate strategy that is resilient to climate change and is going to be far better positioned to either avoid or respond to those shocks and plan for and operate within those chronic stress environments. So yeah, that's the opportunity that is lost when you focus on this purely as a compliance, a disclosure activity and a compliance exercise. Any sort of sustainability practitioner can write the disclosure. That's not the challenge. The challenge is actually building from that and protecting the organisation from those climate-related risks, and positioning the organisation to capitalise on the opportunities, and that's where you are actually changing financial performance outcomes for the organisation.
Excellent. I think that is a perfect answer and a perfect way to end today. So a huge thank you to our panel. So Ken Lunty, Alex Monson, Daniel Cahill and Shauna Coffey for their time and input today. Brilliant session. So thank you all. I'd also like to thank Engineers Australia's industry partner Arcadis for their support. My final message or my final request to the audience, if you don't mind, please completing the short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below. As you all know, that feedback really does help us to improve and plan future sessions for you all. Finally, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Industry Partners event. Good afternoon.